I will show you today what is involved in submitting your resource allocation, as we call it formally, because you don't just apply for compute time, of course, but also for other resources. And this changes over time, depending on what type of computer we have at that moment. So when we talk about resources, we mean compute time, disk space, tape space, and so on. So writing a proposal is not the most fun thing in the world. So we try to make it as easy as possible for you, at least to file it with us and to upload all the documents which are needed in the review process. But taking a step back, I would like to give you a short overview how resources are handled at DKRZ and which groups are involved. So traditionally, we have two large groups which somehow overlap, which are the DKRZ shareholders, because DKRZ is a company after all, and the big group of the climate science community in Germany and abroad. So they share both half of the resources which DKRZ can provide. This has historical reasons, mainly to do with the way the computer was funded in the past. This has changed a little bit, but the split of 50-50 between those groups has remained the same. There are some endeavors which are so important that both groups decide that they should be that the resources for these type of projects should go from the share of the respective group to a shared part of the resources which are dedicated to consortial calculations. And these are big projects, typically like CMIP and so on, where all of climate science benefits from the results. So those two groups give up to 25% of their resources to this part. And then inside the shareholder share, we have our 4 shareholders, which have different sizes, which decide among themselves which working group inside their share gets how much time. So WLA is not concerned with our shareholders. They only look at how to distribute the community part to people from the climate science community who apply for resources. And the WLA is German for Wissenschaftlicher Lenkungsausschuss, so the English term would be Scientific Steering Committee. So this committee consists of 8 people, and it is, again, 50% shareholders and 50% community members. So from the shareholders, we have Sönke Zähle for Max Planck Institute, then Martin Werner for the Alfred Wegener Institute, Frauke Feser for Helmholtz-Zentrum Gestacht, and Detlef Stammer for University of Hamburg, and then Andreas Hense from University of Bonn, Klaus Bönig from Geomar Kiel, and Uwe Ulbrich from Freie Universität Berlin, and of course our current chairman, Robert Sausen from DLR Oberpfaffenhofen. They decide how to distribute the resources in the community share, which are substantial, like CPU time. We have about 12 million node hours of CPU time to distribute in this share, almost 20 petabytes of disk space and even more tape space. So a little bit about the history. WLA was, the first meeting was August 2000, so it's now 20 years anniversary. So at that time, yeah, 2 years later, we got a new machine. And this was actually the first time when WLA allocated resources from the community share. From then, our NEC SX6 system, Hurricane, and yeah, this is quite a long time ago. But we still have projects from that time. So our longest lived community project is BDO 80 from DLR Oberpfaffenhofen. It was originally, I think, actually a project by Robert Sausen. And then fast forward to today, WLA, still 8 people, reviews allocation resources from 161 projects we now have in the community share. They can submit, if they want to, proposals twice a year. They don't all do that, but they have to submit a proposal at least once a year. So it's quite a burden because WLA also does all the reviewing internally. So there are no external reviewers. So to give you a little bit an overview over the timeline, so we have 2 types of projects in terms of timeline. One we call winter projects, which begin at January 1st. And then we have summer projects, which begin on July 1st. And the definition is decided when they first submit their first proposal, whether it's in winter or in summer. And then they get an allocation for 12 months. And after the 12 months are over, you have to submit again an allocation for additional 12 months. Otherwise, your project ends. But you can also submit a proposal while your allocation is still ongoing, like after 6 months, because we have 2 dates for the possibility to submit proposals per year. And the resources you get at that point in time go on top of your current allocation. So if you see after 6 months, okay, the resources I got not enough, or I'm making faster progress than I anticipated, then you can request additional resources. But at the end, you have to really request a whole new set of resources for the next 12 months. And then there's, of course, the whole process has to be finished at that point where you get your resources. So you have to submit a proposal sometime ahead of the reviewing process and the WLA meeting and then the actual granting of the resources. So right now we just opened the window for allocation requests, and this will end October 31st. So you have from now on until October 31st, you can submit your allocation request. Then will be reviewed and so on. And if you get a positive review, you can use the resources you request now, starting January 1st. The same thing happens again in spring. So about 6 weeks before April 30th, we call for new allocation requests. And then you can submit your request until April 30th. And then for July 1st, you get your new resources. And what are these? So resources, of course, the most important one for you is compute time. And there are a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, the unit for this resource is node hours. So you may know from other computer centers that they allocate their CPU resources, their compute time in CPU hours. So if you want to convert CPU hours to the node hours we use, it's not so straightforward because we have two types of nodes in terms of CPU count. So one with 36 and one with 24. They're also a little bit different in speeds. So the ones with a lower CPU count are a little bit faster than the ones with 36. But in the end, the one with 36 CPUs is able to deliver more throughput than the smaller ones, even though they are faster. But we don't differentiate between them. So you get node hours, and it's up to you whether you spend them on nodes with 24 or with 36 CPU hours. So from a computing center's point of view, our interest is to keep the computer all the time running. So we want to have maximum utilization of the computer if possible. And to incentivize this, we require that you use your CPU time over the period of 3 months. You have to use a quarter of your allocated CPU time. And if you don't do that, this time will expire and just reflects the fact that whether the computer is occupied or not, compute time is gone. You can't get it back. So if you use the computer continuously over the whole year, you will have no problem. If you, for some reason, cannot use it, you cannot save the time. But on the other hand, you can use more CPU time than a quarter in the first 3 months. If you are able to do that, then you can delay a little bit in the next 3 months or whatever, but you always have to use, as I said, after 3 months, 25%, after 6 months, 50%, and after 9 months, you have to use 75%. At the end of the year, of course, you have to use everything because you cannot take any CPU time from one allocation to the next time. That's also not possible. So it pays to constantly use the computer. And if you're not able to use it, somebody else will get your time essentially, and yours will expire. Then if you get additional compute time after the 6 months, as I said, where you can get CPU time on top of your current allocation, that time, of course, has to be used in the remaining 6 months of your current allocation. So after 3 months, you already have to be using 50% of those resources you get at that point in time. And then after 6 months, of course, you have to use up everything, otherwise it will be gone. So this is compute time. What we call Lustre Work is the disk space on our parallel file system. And here the unit is gigabytes in the sense that it's 1024 to the power of 3 bytes. This is important that you keep that in mind, that it's not terabyte, it's gigabytes. The entire workspace has to be requested and allocated for each allocation period. That means if you use a certain amount of disk space in the first year, then you have to, and you want to continue using that, then you have to request and actually get the the entire space again in the next year. If you get less, then you may have to reduce your storage footprint on disks, because you will have to stay within a reduced quota. If you get more, of course, you can use more, but you always have to request the entire data space you need. Again, if you request additional resources during your allocation period, this goes on top of your current allocation. But you can just use that until the end of your allocation, meaning 6 months in this case, and then you have again to request and receive all the space you need for the next year. So our tape resource is called HPSS Arc. This is for historical reasons again allocated in gigabytes, meaning 1000 to the power of 3. I mean, there's not a huge difference, but you should keep that in mind if you want to transfer from disk to tape. The disk storage expires after 12 months, but here it's handled that way that whatever you've written during those 12 months on tape stays on tape until the end of the project plus 1 year. So if you don't use your space, it will expire. But if you use it, you can keep it until the end of the project. You don't have to request it again. It will just stay there. And you only need to request storage you need on top of that what you already got. So if you intend to write additional data, then you have to request that. If you just want to keep it as it is, you don't have to request anything. You just will keep it until your project runs out. And here again, the additional allocation after 6 months goes on top of the current allocation, but you have to use it up until the end of your allocation period. Then we have a different tape storage class, which is called HPSS Doku. And the difference to the normal archive is just that data which is written here stays there for 10 years. So you may have obligations towards your funding agency or something like that to keep your data for 10 years. And then this would be the type of storage you would use to save this data for 10 years. Even if your project ends much earlier, the data will stay there and will be available. There are additional precautions against data corruption and so on. So you have 2 copies of the data, and some of it is even replicated in a different computing center. So this is a pretty expensive resource. So you typically can only get, let's say, 10% or so of your normal archive storage in this Doku storage class, unless you have a good reason why you need more. You will get about 10%, but you still have to request it, otherwise you won't get it. So just to give you an overview over the review process, first of all, of course, it's your part. You have to submit your allocation request, and I will show you in an online demo really how it's done on our server. We have a web form for that. But just to show you what happens after you submitted your request until you actually get your resources, we have first a stage where we from DKRZ have a look at your application to see if there are any obvious problems with it, like whether the units are correct, but please check it yourself. But if we see that you accidentally meant terabytes instead of gigabytes, then we will get back to you and you will be able to fix this, or we can fix it for you. So it makes sense to be available, or at least one person of your project be available after you submitted your allocation requests in case we want to contact you to sort out some problems with your allocation request. We also look at consistency. This can occur because we have kind of a written proposal, and then we have a table with all the experiments. I will go into this when I show you how the allocation request is done. And if there are any discrepancies between those two parts, then we might also try to contact you to fix this. And in some cases, the person at DKRZ, I mean, this, as I said, we have 161 projects, so we spread all the applications among many people at DKRZ. But sometimes the person looking into your allocation request has some model knowledge of the model you are using. And if he or she finds out that maybe you requested not enough resources for what you intend to do with this model, or too much, or whatever, then we might also get back to you, and then we can discuss what would be a reasonable amount of resources to request for this type of model runs. And this goes both ways. We also, if we're able to, we tell the reviewers if this amount of resources fits with the type of model you're using. And as I said, we iterate the proposal with you or an administrator of your project if we are able to contact somebody. If we cannot contact anybody, it just stays as it is. And then, of course, the most important step, the review process. So we have at least 2 reviewers assigned to your allocation request. And for larger projects, there are 3 or even more, which work, of course, independently. And they get assigned to your project at the beginning of your project. So if you propose another allocation request 1 year later, you probably will get the same reviewers again. Of course, this is not really fixed because reviewers can leave WLA or maybe not available at that during that allocation period. But usually you will stay with the same reviewers over the years. And what they do, of course, is they review your request and write a first initial assessment and a proposal for a cut, because in all the time I've been involved in this, the demand for resources was always much higher than what we are able to provide. So the requests have to be cut. They are not cut, of course, all the same. Some of them are not cut, but on average, we have to cut about, I would say, 50% or even more, depending on the age of the machine, of course. When the machine is new, usually we don't have to cut so much because people have to adapt to the new machine. But like with Mistral now, at the end of the lifetime of the computer, the demand is very high, but the computer is still the same as it was for 4 or 5 years ago. Okay, then after the review process, we have the WLA meeting. This is where all members of WLA come together or came together until recently, and now we are doing it like this as a go-to meeting. And here the allocation requests are discussed. Of course, we can't discuss all of them, it would take too long. So they are usually ranked by volume, and also if the reviewers dissent a lot, then this will also be discussed with all members of WLA, and they have to look whether the total amount of resources granted match what we have available, and if not, then we have to reduce the granted resources even more. So after the WLA meeting, one of the reviewers has to write a consensus assessment, which then will be communicated to the requesting project. So if you've done this already, you probably know this. When you get from us the email with the granted resources, there may be one paragraph where the reviewers tell you why they applied a cut and what you maybe could leave out because of the reduced resources, or have some other comment which you then have to reply to next time you apply for new resources. And what we also do, of course, is that we create new projects at that point in time, and we actually grant the resources which are then applied to your project as priority in the case of CPU time. If you get a lot of CPU time, this translates essentially in priority in our scheduling system. And of course, the storage resources are translated to quotas, which are then applied to the Lustre file system or the HPSS storage. And as I said, you get an email about the outcome, and then you can start using your resources. This usually happens really shortly before the allocation period actually starts. So I would think that for this winter allocation period, you will get an email shortly before Christmas, not earlier. You can ask us, usually after the WLA meeting, we know pretty sure how much resources you will actually get. So if you really need to know, you can ask beratung@dkrz.de, and we can tell you the outcome of the reviewing process, but the formulation of the assessment and so on, this will take some time, actually until shortly before Christmas for the winter period. And then you will get the email with the outcome, and then starting January 1st, you can use your new resources. Okay, I will now show you how this first step is done. So just let me see. Flo was so generous to offer his project as a guinea pig. So I will take the pretty large project of EasyWays as an example. So this can be done by all the by the PI, of course, and all the administrators of the project. So it doesn't have to be Joachim Bierkamp in this case who does the work, and it will probably be Florian Ziemen who will be clicking here through. And what you do, you just click into your project. There you see the resources you got for this year. And then at the end, you have this button to request allocation of resources for the next year. And in this case, the project started in January. So the allocation period is essentially the year from January to December. So at this point, Flow has to allocate resources, otherwise the project would be closed. And what needs to be done here is we have to get rid of all the red, essentially. So it doesn't matter which order you do it, and you can actually change, even if you entered something, you can change it later on, up until the point where you confirm your allocation request. And by that, you signal to us that your allocation request is ready to be further processed. So because this is an ongoing project, you need to submit a report of what you've done over the last year. So we have a template for this. There's not much in it, just some data points on the project itself, and then you should write about 2 pages. Can be a little bit more if you want, but not too lengthy about what you've done in the last year. So just upload something here. So Flo, don't get your hopes up. I didn't write a report for you. It's just the one from last year. Oh, okay. So not the RTF, of course. It has to be a PDF. So the report got turned green. So we're done with this. But we could, of course, change it if we want to improve it, or if we have a last minute epiphany of what we want to write there. Okay, we just closed the wrong tab. So you can interrupt this anytime you want and come back later. So there's every time you hit submit, it's written to the database, and your work is saved. Okay, so publications. If you made publications during the last year, you can enter them here. This, of course, is important for the reviewing process, and also for DKRZ to have an overview over how many and which type of publications are based on work at DKRZ. So this is very important for us when it comes to get additional funding for our next machine. But if you didn't make any publications, then you can leave this out. But response. So if the reviewers last time had anything to say to you, and in this case, they had a lot to say, you have to reply to this. And it should be pretty specific, because if I may offer my opinion here, if a reviewer writes something like this and you just ignore it, it doesn't make a good impression. So this is not how to do it. Anyway, you have to write something. Okay, next up is a statement about external reviewer. So, of course, Flo has already entered this last year, but you still have to confirm this year that nothing changed, or if something changed, then you have to update the information about the external review. And so this is a European Commission project, and I guess there was no change. So I just confirm it, that it's correct, and submit it. So as I already said, we have a table of experiments which you have to hand in. This is something we have since a couple of years. And before that, people mostly had a similar table inside their request document. But it's good to have this kind of separate. You can still have it again in the request document if you want to, but for statistical reasons and also to have it very prominently for the reviewers in a standardized form, it's very helpful to have a list of experiments. So I would suggest that you start with this and then maybe copy it into your request document. But of course, you can do it the way you want to do it. There are two ways to enter experiments. The best way to do it, if you only have a couple of them, is through this web form. So when we want to enter a new experiment, you have to give it a name and the model and resolution. So icon resolution, then you have to tell how many years. So let's say 1000. And then you have to tell the system what kind of resources you need for this one experiment. So, and I mean, there's some additional information about what you should fill in if it's not really a model run over so and so many years. Then you can leave the simulated years empty or 0, but you should enter for any activity for which you need resources, you should enter an experiment. So even if it's post-processing or visualization or something like that, anything you need resources for, you have to state here, because you only get the resources you apply for in this table. This is really the central form where you tell us how many resources you need during the next 12 months. So we say, okay, this is low res stuff. So let's say 10,000 node hours only. So, and gigabytes, I have no idea if this is realistic. And do some post-processing and don't need to write everything in archive. And then, I don't know, just a little bit of Doku space. That's it. Then we have here the first experiment. You can edit it again here, or you can delete it. And if you only have a couple of experiments, as I said, then you can do it this way. But if you have a larger project, then this can be very tedious. And if you want to change something, it's not as easy to do as, for example, in a spreadsheet. So what we also offer is that you do it externally and then upload the table. So I just want to show it here by taking the last year's table. So you have a link here to download last year's table. And this is in a format called comma-separated values. And you can import this in any type of spreadsheet there is. I'm using LibreOffice here, but you can also do it with Excel or whatever. So I'm importing it. You have to watch out that it's correctly imported. But this looks fine. And here you see all the experiments flow submitted for last year. So suppose we want to do the same essentially as last year, which is not realistic, but just for demonstration purposes. We say, okay, we do this, but we need more resources, more CPU time, because our models got more complex or whatever. So let's say we need 1.5 times the what we requested last year. So we just multiply this. Okay, and I mean, this is a spreadsheet. You could have the most complex formulas here and work with your experiments and yeah, you could calculate CPU time from the years you're running here. But what you have to make sure is that you stay within this format. So you could add additional rows with additional experiments, of course, but you cannot change the columns. So the columns are, so to say, fixed. You can use columns outside of the scope of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but you cannot rename the columns or switch them or whatever. Then our importing mechanism would get confused. And what also is important here, we have a total line. This is just for information purposes. The parsing of this table stops after it encounters an empty line. So if you add additional lines, you don't have to calculate the total, but you have to make sure that the total doesn't stay here. If, for example, if you if you add this here, okay, then we will have these here in addition to what we have on top. But if we would have a total line below, directly below the last experiment line, it would be interpreted as an experiment, and this is not what we want. Anyway, we're now saving this, and because I didn't change the format of the table, it still is CSV, but this is important. You cannot upload an Excel table. You always have to export it as CSV. This is possible also in Excel, but this is the only format that our server can import. So if we now go back to the server and upload the table, so this takes a little bit, and then we have all the experiments we just entered. And if you would have used formulas or something like this in the Excel, then during exporting them to a CSV, they would be rendered as absolute values. And this is actually the only thing our server can import. That's why we don't import Excel directly. It has to be in CSV. Okay, that's the table. And then the document is again a PDF document you have to write. We have, again, a template for this that we give, we give some section headings. This is a suggestion, but it makes sense to cover all the topics given here. And once you've written this, and Robert will give some hints about what is important here, then you have to upload your proposal. And with that, we're done. as far as this form is concerned, we still have to confirm our request. At this point, we can still change anything we want. But once we confirm the request, it's a two-step. This is first some kind of a summary of your request, so information about the PI, external review, and all the project members. And then the sum of all the resources you're requesting. So you should double check this, that this is really what you want. And then you can confirm this. In the past, you had to print this and mail it to us, but this is only necessary for new projects. So if you request a new project, you get this as PDF, and you have to print it out and sign it and mail it back to us. But for ongoing projects like this one, you don't have to do this, just confirm it. And then you see that this project has a review request going on. And if you look into your project table, you also see this label here that review is requested. Once we assign reviewers, this will change to currently reviewed, I think. So then you'll see that at this point in time, it went on to the reviewers. And of course, then the next step for you is that you get the email with the granted resources, and then this label will go away, and you can start using your new resources. So that's it from my side. So I will now hand over to Robert, who has a few words on the proposal document you have to submit.
Yeah, okay. Martin, thank you very much for giving this overview presentation, which I guess will help the applicants quite a bit. I would like to give some additional comments from the viewpoint of a reviewer and of a member of the WLA. There are few points I would like to address. First, if you are a member of a joint project, Verbundsantrag of BMWF, then we would like to see only one proposal. The idea is if you work together in a joint project, you work together and you should agree how you share the distributions, the resources most fair among the participants. If you can't do this, this would be not a good idea for having a joint project, because if you cannot agree on resources, you cannot agree on the scientific work. That's an important thing that makes it somewhat easier. From this kind of overview proposal, the reviewers would like to see what's really going on. And this generally, reviewers would to see when you make a proposal two things. First, that the proposal is scientifically well-based. In part, this is done if you have an external review of the project, then we accept that the external reviewers have done this properly. Then it comes to the request of the resources, and there we would like really to see, are the requested resources adequate? Or do you simply ask some numbers in the order, if I ask for much, I will get much? I can tell you we do not reduce by a lawn cutter or whatever simple formula. We really read the proposals, and therefore it's important that you do appropriate requests. And in particular, if you ask for very large resources, the reviewers would like to see that you are experienced in using such a big computer, that you have the knowledge how to use this effectively. So if you start with a new proposal and haven't shown that you can do this a priori, the reviewers will be very skeptical whether you can use this large amounts in a useful way. Therefore, you would get a large cut unless you can prove that you really can use this in a proper way. And also what we require you to do, you have seen that you not only request for compute times, you have also request for 3 types of data storage. And when you do this, you should think about how to handle your output. What will you do with the output? What is needed? Which data do I really need and what are only nice to have? Because currently storage is the most expensive thing. Therefore, we have to look more and more on these resources. And if you have the impression that you didn't think about this, we would ask you to come up with a better way of handling your output. So if it's a large project, it's mandatory that you have a data management plan. But also, if you have a smaller project, you should at least think on your own what I'm going to do with the data, how which will I use later, and how I'm going to archive these. Please note that particularly the space on work is very limited. It's convenient to have all the data on work, but as this space is limited, you should think, what do I have to put in an archive and get back after a while, and what can I do directly? So of course, it's the most best way is to do part of at least reduction of the data while your compute job is running, while the data anyhow in the machine. And this would reduce I/O. This would reduce the necessary storage, and this would basically speed up your work time, because you have not to upload again the data. And another things, when you get the comments, please answer them seriously. Take your time in this. When the reviewers give you comments, they don't simply give you comments because they would like to give you comments. Sometimes are hints. They may be wrong in some cases, because also reviewers can make mistakes. But be sure that we know what we wrote last year, and that we will check your response with what we sent you the last time. And we also have your last applications. And if we have the impression that you do not react properly to the comments, you can imagine that this will not increase our will to attribute large resources. And another thing is, you have seen that there's a large number of projects which will come to you. So therefore, you are in a bit of competitive situation. You would have to communicate what is most important for you to the reviewers who have only a limited time and a limited brain space to digest your things. So it's simply like in a newspaper. When you start in the beginning, the overview should already like this, that the reviewer says, oh, that's a good idea, and these guys will make a good job. Do this in few lines. It's simply like the headlines in a newspaper, maybe the first paragraph of a newspaper article. So we see what is going on, and then we can go into the details below. Of course, it's not necessary that you have to explain the icon model or something like this, because that's something which is known to the reviewers or any other well-known models. But if you go to models which are not so commonly used, the reviewers would like to see a few lines on the performance of this model, why it's an appropriate thing. And sometimes, which I think Mattis did not mention, there can be also data projects, so projects which have basically no or only very, very few computer resources, but you use it to archive data which will be are of need for follow-on projects, or which are of need for evaluation by other groups who will use your data. So that's also a way to think about this, and you should potentially separate this data project from the compute projects which have been addressed so far. Let's see if I got something. No, I guess that was everything I have on my list right here. And so I will be ready now if there's a question or something like this.